You ever hear that sound? That specific. Sharp click of a police radio when someone's calling for backup. It's a sound that stops the blood in your veins. Man, it doesn't matter if you're wearing a $3,000 suit or a beat-up hoodie you've had since college. When you're a man who looks like me, that sound carries a weight you can't ever truly outrun. I'm sitting here, Dade, 50 years old, the CEO of a tech company that basically keeps the logistics of half this country running, and yet, I'm still haunted by the silence of a terminal and the cold look in a stranger's eyes. Before I get into the heart of this mess, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or state you're checking in from. It helps me feel like I'm not just talking to a screen, but talking to a brother, a friend, someone who gets it. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We're building something real here, and I don't want you to miss how this whole thing unfolded. It was a Tuesday at JFK. You know the vibe? Everyone's in a rush. The air is thick with the smell of burnt jet fuel and expensive Cinnabon, and the tension is high enough to snap a guitar string. I was exhausted. Man, I'd been up since 4:00 a.m. closing a deal with a firm in London, and I had a 6:00 p.m. flight to LA for a merger that was going to put my company into the billion-dollar bracket. This wasn't just another business trip. This was the finish line of a 20-year marathon. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon. I was a late bloomer. I didn't hit my stride until I was 45. I spent my 20s and 30s grinding in a basement, eating ramen, and being told no by every venture capitalist from Palo Alto to New York. I remember the hunger. I remember the way my father's hands looked after 40 years of working as a janitor at a hospital. Cracked, stained, and tired. He used to tell me, "Marcus, they'll see your skin before they see your soul. So make sure your soul is too bright for them to ignore." So there I was, standing in the check-in line for first class. I wasn't in my CEO armor that day. No suit, no crisp white shirt. I was wearing a black hoodie, some comfortable joggers, and a pair of sneakers that looked plain but cost more than my first car. I had my laptop bag over one shoulder and my carry-on in the other hand. I just wanted to get to the lounge, grab a double espresso, and disappear into my spreadsheets for an hour. But the moment I stepped into that gold member lane, the energy shifted. You ever feel that? Like the oxygen just left the room. There was a woman standing a few feet ahead of me. Let's call her a classic New York socialite. Pearls. A coat that probably cost a semester of tuition, and a look of permanent dissatisfaction on her face. She turned around, saw me, and her hand immediately went to her purse. She didn't just touch it. She clutched it like I was a magnetic force, pulling the leather right out of her grip. I sighed. I've seen that movie 1,000 times. I just looked at my phone, checking the stock prices, trying to stay in my lane. But she wasn't done. She leaned over to the gate agent and whispered something, gesturing toward me with a sharp flick of her chin. The agent, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, looked up at me, then back at her. He seemed hesitant, but she kept talking, her voice getting louder. "It's about the security of the lounge." I heard her say, "We pay a premium for a certain environment. You can't just let anyone wander in here because they found a ticket on the ground." I felt that familiar heat crawling up my neck. That's the thing about being successful in black. You spend half your life trying to prove you belong in rooms you already paid to be in. I walked up to the counter when it was my turn. I didn't say a word. I just handed over my digital boarding pass and my ID. The agent scanned it. He looked at the screen, then at me, then at the screen again. His eyes went wide. He saw the Diamond Elite status. He saw the name. "Mr. Sterling," he stammered. his voice jumping an octave. "I'm so sorry for the delay. Please, head right into the lounge. The concierge is expecting you." I took my phone back and gave a small, tight nod. I walked past the woman with the pearls. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open, looking like she'd just swallowed a lemon. I wanted to say something. I wanted to flash my watch or mention the merger, but I didn't. I remembered my father. I just kept my soul bright and my mouth shut. But man, the peace didn't last. I walked into the first-class lounge, and for a second, it felt like I'd stepped into a different world. It was quiet, just the clink of silverware on porcelain and the low hum of CNN on the big screens. The air smelled like sandalwood and fresh-baked pastries. I found a corner seat, a big leather armchair that faced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway. I watched a 747 lift off into the gray New York sky and felt a moment of pride. I did it. Dad, I thought, I'm finally here. I opened my laptop. I had about 45 minutes before boarding. I was deep into a contract, highlighting clauses about intellectual property. When I felt a presence, you know that feeling when someone is standing too close. I didn't look up at first. I figured it was a waiter offering a drink, but the silence stretched too long. I looked up, and there she was, Pearl Lady. She had followed me into the lounge. She was standing about 5 feet away, her arms crossed over her chest, talking to a man in a sharp black blazer, the lounge manager. "I'm telling you, it's a mistake," she was saying, not even trying to lower her voice now. "He doesn't have a bag that looks like he belongs in first class. He's been sitting there for 10 minutes, staring at a screen. He could be skimming data. He could be anyone. I don't feel safe with my belongings out." The manager looked uncomfortable. He was a middle-aged white guy. Trying to play it neutral. "Ma'am?" He was checked in at the front desk. "I'm sure everything is fine." "Everything is not fine," she snapped. I saw him in the line. He looked out of place. "Why aren't you asking for his credentials again? Is it because you're afraid of being politically incorrect?" My safety isn't a political issue. I felt the eyes of every other person in that lounge turn toward me. There were maybe 20 people in there, CEOs, lawyers, bankers, and suddenly, I was the main attraction. I felt like a bug under a microscope. I could feel the sweat starting to bead at my hairline. Not because I was guilty of anything, but because of the sheer humiliation of it. This is the part people don't tell you about success. They tell you about the cars and the houses, but they don't tell you about the way the world tries to shrink you back down to size the moment you get comfortable. I closed my laptop. Slowly. I didn't want to make any sudden movements. Isn't that the phrase they always use? I looked the manager in the eye. I didn't wait for him to come to me. "Is there a problem here?" I asked. My voice was calm, deep. I've spent years mastering that boardroom voice, the one that sounds like authority and steady ground. The manager stepped closer, his face turning a light shade of pink. "Sir, I'm very sorry to bother you. We've had a concern raised by another guest. Would you mind just showing me your lounge invite or your boarding pass one more time? Just to clear the air." "To clear the air?" I repeated. I felt a bitter laugh bubbling in my chest. The air was clear until she started talking. I checked in at the front. "My face is on your system. Why am I being asked twice?" The woman stepped forward, her face twisted in a sneer. "Because you look like you're here to work on the plumbing, not fly to LA. Give him the ID. If you actually have one." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, and it made me sad. She wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of a world where a man who looks like me could sit in the same chair as her. I reached into my pocket. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled out my wallet, but my fingers were shaking just a little bit. That's the trauma part. It doesn't matter how many millions you have in the bank. Your body remembers the times you were powerless. As I pulled out my ID, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I looked tired. I looked like a man who had been fighting his whole life. And just as I was about to hand that plastic card to the manager, the lounge door slid open. I saw the manager's eyes dart toward the entrance. His posture changed instantly. He went from being awkwardly polite to terrified. I didn't turn around yet. I was still holding my ID out. My arm extended in the air, waiting for him to take it. But he didn't. He stepped back, his hands dropping to his sides. The woman with the pearls looked toward the door, too, and her smug expression flickered for a second. There was a heavy silence that filled the lounge, heavier than the one before. I could hear the sound of heavy footsteps on the thick carpet. Purposeful, rhythmic footsteps. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I knew that walk. I knew that energy. I finally lowered my hand, clutching my ID so hard the edges dug into my palm. I turned my head just enough to see who had walked in. It wasn't the police. It wasn't security. It was a man I hadn't seen in 2 years. But I'd recognize that silhouette anywhere. He was wearing a tailored gray suit that screamed old money. And he was walking straight toward our little circle with a look of absolute fury on his face. I felt a chill run down my spine. My mind started racing, trying to figure out if this was a coincidence or a setup. The manager started to speak, his voice trembling. "Sir, I didn't expect you until later." But the man in the gray suit didn't even look at the manager. He didn't look at the woman. He stopped right in front of me, his shadow falling over my leather chair. And for a long, agonizing moment, he didn't say a word. He just stared at me, his eyes searching my face like he was looking for a ghost. I felt the air in the lounge grow cold, the luxury of the room suddenly feeling like a cage. I braced myself, my hand tightening on the armrest of the chair, feeling the smooth leather beneath my fingertips as the weight of the situation shifted into something I wasn't prepared for. The heavy silence didn't just hang there. It pressed against my chest like a physical weight, forcing the air out of my lungs. I looked up into those pale, sharp eyes I had trusted to watch my back in boardroom wars across 3 continents. And for a split second, I expected a hand on my shoulder. I expected the thunder of a brother coming to my defense. But Tom didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just stood there, smelling of expensive sandalwood and the kind of effortless confidence that only comes when the world has never told you no. The lounge manager was practically vibrating with nervous energy. His hands clasped so tight his knuckles were white, looking at Tom like he was a savior sent from the heavens. "Mr. Callahan," the manager whispered, his voice cracking like dry parchment. There was a misunderstanding with your associate. We were trying to ensure the security protocols for the Gold Lounge were being followed. This lady had some concerns about." Tom's gaze finally flicked away from me, landing on the woman with the pearls. She straightened her back, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She probably thought Tom was the cavalry, the real elite coming to sweep the riffraff out of her sight. I watched her eyes sparkle with that toxic validation, the kind people get when they think their prejudices are finally being rewarded by someone of status. Tom checked his Patek Philippe, the one I'd given him as a gift when we landed our first $10 million contract 5 years ago. He didn't look at the manager with anger. He didn't look at the woman with disgust. He looked at them both with a bored, transactional impatience that hurt worse than a punch to the gut. Then, he turned his head just enough to catch my eye. "Marcus," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth we usually shared over late-night steaks and strategy sessions. "We're on a tight schedule. The pilot wants to push back 10 minutes early to beat the headwind. Just show them what they need so we can get moving. We can't afford to be late for the LA board." The ID card felt like a piece of burning coal in my hand. My arm was still extended, frozen in the air. "Just show them." The words echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my dignity. Tom wasn't asking them why they were harassing his partner. He wasn't demanding an apology for the blatant profiling happening right under his nose. He was asking me to comply. He was asking me to be reasonable so his day wouldn't be inconvenienced. He was choosing the path of least resistance over the path of justice. And in that moment, the 10 years of history we had, the late nights, the shared dreams, the struggles, seemed to evaporate into the recycled air of the terminal. I looked at the manager, then at the Pearl Lady, who was now looking at me like I was a naughty child being scolded by his father. I could feel the heat behind my eyes, that stinging sensation of being betrayed by someone you thought was in your foxhole. I handed the ID to the manager. He took it with trembling fingers, glanced at it for half a second, and handed it back immediately. "Everything is in order, Mr. Sterling. Truly sorry for the inconvenience," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice coming out low and gravelly. No apology for the concern. No acknowledgement that I was sitting here minding my own business before I was treated like a trespasser. Tom let out a short, sharp sigh. "Marcus, let it go. We've got $1 billion merger waiting on the other side of this flight. Don't let a little airport drama throw you off your game. Let's move." He turned on his heel and started walking toward the gate, his strides long and confident. He didn't wait to see if I was following. He didn't check to see if I was okay. He just moved forward, leaving me standing there in the middle of the lounge with the weight of 20 stairs pinning me to the carpet. I shoved my ID back into my wallet and grabbed my laptop bag. I felt small. I felt like the janitor's son again, standing in the hallway of a fancy school, wondering if the floor was the only thing I was allowed to touch. The walk from the lounge to Gate B12 felt like a mile-long gauntlet. The terminal was a blur of neon lights, rushing travelers, and the constant, rhythmic clacking of rolling suitcases. Usually, I love the energy of an airport. It's the sound of progress, of people going places. But today, the air felt heavy, like it was made of lead. I walked 10 paces behind Tom. I watched the way people moved out of his way. They saw the suit, the height, the silver hair, and they saw a man who owned the world. Then they looked at me, the man in the hoodie and joggers, and I could see them doing the mental math. They weren't seeing a CEO, they were seeing a shadow. We reached the gate, and the boarding process was already underway. The Group 1 sign was flashing. Tom walked straight to the front of the line, flashing his digital pass with a practiced ease. The gate agent smiled, a genuine, wide-eyed welcome aboard smile. As I stepped up behind him, the smile didn't just fade, it vanished. It was replaced by a look of professional scrutiny. "Passport and boarding pass, please," the agent said, her voice dropping into a flat, robotic tone. I pulled them out. Again, I watched her eyes jump from the photo to my face, then back to the photo. She tapped something into her computer. A red light flashed. My heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Sterling, it seems you've been flagged for an additional security screening," she said, her eyes shifting to the 2 TSA officers standing near the jet bridge entrance. If you could step to the side. Please. I looked ahead. Tom was already halfway down the jet bridge. He heard her. He had to have heard her. He paused for a fraction of a second, his head turning slightly. But he didn't stop. He didn't come back. He just kept walking, disappearing into the tunnel that led to the plane. The silent betrayal had just turned into a loud, ringing abandonment. Step to the side. Sir, one of the TSA officers said, his hand resting near his belt. He was a young guy, maybe 25, with a buzz cut and a look in his eyes that said he was looking for a reason to be a hero. I stepped into the box, that little taped-off area that feels like a cage, even though there are no bars. I put my laptop bag on the table. I watched them unzip it, their gloved hands rummaging through my cables, my documents, the very heart of my business. They took out my laptop and ran a wand over it. They opened my carry-on and started pulling out my clothes, my workout gear, my extra shirts, my noise-canceling headphones. What are we looking for? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I just went through the main security check 30 minutes ago. I was in the first-class lounge. Random selection. Sir, just procedure, the officer said, not looking at me. He was holding up a small pouch containing my medication, just some basic stuff for blood pressure and vitamins. He opened every bottle, shaking the pills into his palm. I stood there, my arms out to my sides, as the second officer began the pat-down. His hands were heavy, impersonal. He moved down my torso, my legs, my ankles. I looked around the terminal. People were stopping to watch. A group of teenagers whispered and pointed. A man in a business suit walked by, shaking his head with a look of, I knew it, plastered on his face. This was the ritual of humiliation. It wasn't about safety. It was about reminding me that no matter how high I flew, they could always pull me back down to the dirt. I thought about the merger. I thought about the board members waiting in LA, men who looked like Tom, men who spoke like Tom. If I arrived late, if I arrived looking disheveled and broken, would they still trust me with their billions? Or would they see what the TSA saw? A liability, a random problem. You're good to go, the officer finally said, shoving my clothes back into my suitcase in a tangled mess. He didn't even bother to zip it back up properly. I spent 5 minutes on my knees on the cold airport floor, trying to repack my life while the final boarding call echoed through the speakers. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the zipper to catch. I felt a stinging in my chest, a deep, raw ache that went beyond anger. It was the realization that I was participating in my own degradation just to keep a seat at a table that didn't even want me there. I stood up, slung my bag over my shoulder, and walked down the jet bridge. The air inside the tunnel was stagnant, smelling of old carpet and hydraulic fluid. Each step felt like I was walking through molasses. I reached the door of the plane, and the lead flight attendant was standing there, checking her watch. She was a blonde woman in her 30s, her uniform crisp, her hair pulled back into a tight, "Perfect bun. Welcome aboard," she said, her voice tight. "We've been waiting for you, Mr. Sterling. We're almost ready for pushback." "I was detained at the gate," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. She didn't offer a sorry to hear that. She didn't offer a sympathetic look. She just gestured toward the cabin. "Please take your seat quickly so we can close the door." I walked into the first-class cabin. It was a sea of blue leather, soft lighting, and the quiet clinking of pre-flight champagne glasses. I saw Tom. He was already settled into 2A, his noise-canceling headphones on, a glass of sparkling water on his tray table. He was looking at his tablet, completely immersed in his own world, He didn't even look up when I walked by. I moved toward the front, looking for 1A, the seat I'd paid $5,000 for. The seat that was supposed to be my sanctuary for the next 6 hours. I reached the row, my eyes searching for the number. But when I found it, I froze. The seat wasn't empty. There was a man sitting there, a white man in his late 60s, wearing a golf shirt and khakis. He had his shoes off, his feet propped up on the footrest, and he was leafing through a magazine like he owned the place. His bags were stuffed into the overhead bin directly above the seat, the bin that was supposed to be mine. I stood in the aisle, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs again. I looked at the man, then back at my boarding pass, then back at the man. The cabin was quiet, but I could feel the eyes of the other passengers, the ones who had already settled in, starting to drift toward me. I felt that familiar rush of heat, that here we go again, feeling that had been following me since I stepped out of my car at the curb. I took a deep breath, trying to summon the CEO, trying to find the man who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without flinching. I leaned forward slightly, my shadow falling over the man's magazine. But he didn't even glance up. He just turned a page, the crinkle of the paper sounding like a gunshot in the silent cabin. I felt my jaw tighten, the muscles in my neck cording as I realized that the battle for my place in this world wasn't over. It was just moving to a higher altitude. I gripped the strap of my laptop bag, the nylon digging into my shoulder, and prepared myself for the words I knew I was going to have to say. The sound of that magazine page turning was like a slap in the face. It was so casual, so dismissive, that it made my vision blur at the edges for a second. I stood there, rooted to the blue carpet, watching this man, this stranger who had decided my space was his, completely ignore my existence. I could hear the muffled chatter from the rows behind me, the sound of seatbelts clicking, and that high-pitched whine of the jet engines beginning to cycle up. The air in the cabin was starting to get that recycled, pressurized taste, and my chest felt tight, like someone was winding a wire around my ribs. I cleared my throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but in the hush of the first-class cabin, it should have been enough. The man in 1A didn't budge. He just kept reading an article about the best golf courses in Scottsdale, his thumb tracing the edge of the page. I felt a surge of that old, familiar heat, the kind of anger that doesn't explode, but simmers until it's white hot. I leaned down, just a few inches from his shoulder, close enough to see the gray hairs on the back of his neck. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was steady, but there was a vibration in it I couldn't quite kill. "I think you're in my seat. This is 1A. The man finally looked up. He didn't look startled or apologetic. He looked annoyed, like a king being interrupted by a peasant. He took a long, slow look at my hoodie, my tired eyes, and the laptop bag hanging off my shoulder. He didn't even bother to look at my face. "There's plenty of room in the back, buddy," he said, his voice a dry, entitled rasp. I needed the extra legroom for my knee. "Go find a seat somewhere else." I felt my jaw lock. I didn't pay for somewhere else. I paid for 1A. I've got the boarding pass right here. I held it out, the digital screen of my phone glowing in the dim light of the cabin. He didn't even glance at it. He just went back to his magazine. "Talk to the help." "Kid. I'm busy." "Kid. I'm 50 years old. I've built a company that employs thousands of people. I've sat in boardrooms with governors and tech giants. And this man was calling me kid and telling me to talk to the help." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked over at Tom and he was still wearing those headphones, his eyes fixed on his tablet. He had to have heard. He was sitting less than 3 feet away, But he didn't look up. He didn't say a word. He was choosing to be invisible, leaving me to fight a battle he thought was beneath him. I pressed the call button. The ding echoed through the cabin. A few seconds later, the flight attendant from the door, the one with the tight bun and the cold eyes, marched over. She didn't look at the man in the seat. She looked straight at me. Her eyebrows arched in a way that screamed problem passenger. "Is there an issue, sir?" she asked. Her tone wasn't helpful. It was accusatory. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my CEO voice from cracking. "This gentleman is in my assigned seat." I've tried to explain that, but he refuses to move. She shifted her gaze to the man in 1A. Her expression softened instantly. "Sir, is everything okay?" The man looked up and gave her a charming, grandfatherly smile. "Everything's fine, Janet. I just needed a bit more space for my surgery recovery. This young man is being a bit aggressive about it. Surely there's a spot for him in the back." Janet, that was her name, turned back to me. The softness was gone. "Sir, if the gentleman has a medical need, we try to be accommodating. Why don't you follow me to the back of the plane? I'm sure we can find you a nice aisle seat in main cabin." I felt a roar in my ears. Accommodating. "I paid $5,000 for this seat," I said, my voice rising just enough to make the guy in 1B look up. "I don't care about his knee. I care about the fact that I have a 16-hour day ahead of me and a billion-dollar merger to close. He needs to move. Now." Janet stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice. You're being disruptive. If you continue to harass our passengers, I will have to report you for interference with the flight crew." Harass. I felt like I was in a nightmare. I'm the one being robbed. He's in my seat. Why aren't you asking for his boarding pass? She didn't answer. She just reached for the radio on her hip. "Flight deck. We have a non-compliant passenger in first class. Requesting security assistance at the door." The cabin went dead silent. Even the man in 1A stopped reading. I looked around, desperate for one person to say something, one person to witness the insanity of what was happening. But everyone was looking away. They were staring at their laps, their phones, the floor. They didn't want to see the angry black man making a scene. They wanted the problem to go away so they could get their warm nuts and their champagne. I looked at Tom. I finally saw him pull one ear cup off. He looked at me, not with sympathy, but with genuine embarrassment. "Marcus," he whispered, "for God's sake, just take the seat in the back. I'll make it up to you later. Don't blow the merger over a chair. You're making us both look bad. Making us look bad." That was the final straw. The man I had shared my life's work with was more worried about the look than the fact that I was being treated like a criminal for wanting what I'd earned. I felt a coldness settle over me then, a clarity. I realized that all the money, all the status, all the success I'd built was a paper-thin shield. It didn't protect me from the rot in people's hearts. It just made the betrayal hurt more. "I'm not moving, Tom," I said, my voice quiet now, deadly quiet, "and I'm not going to the back." The jet bridge door groaned open again. 2 men stepped through. One was a uniformed officer, but the other was wearing a plain suit with a badge clipped to his belt. An Air Marshal. He was a big man, broad-shouldered with a jaw like a brick. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look for context. He just saw me, the big guy in the hoodie, standing over a seated older white man and a distressed flight attendant. "Sir, step away from the passenger," the Air Marshal said. His hand was resting on the small of his back, near his holster. "Officer, you don't understand," I started, holding my hands up. palms out. I knew the drill. I knew how quickly things could turn lethal. I said, "Step away." He barked. He moved into the aisle, forcing me to back up toward the galley. "Hands where I can see them." Now, I backed up, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I could see the other passengers holding up their phones now. I was going to be the next viral video. The aggressive traveler. The airline meltdown. Nobody would see the TSA search. Nobody would see the lounge harassment. They'd just see the ending. I leaned against the galley wall, the cold metal of the beverage cart pressing into my spine. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated irony wash over me. My company, Skylogics, provided the very logistics software this airline used. Right now, in the belly of this plane, our sensors were tracking every bag. Our algorithms were calculating the fuel load. Our code was the silent heartbeat of this entire flight. I was the reason this plane could fly safely. Yet I was the one being treated like a virus in the system. The Air Marshal stood 3 feet from me, his eyes tracking my every move. "What's the problem here, Janet?" he asked, never taking his eyes off me. "He's refusing to take his seat." "Officer Miller," she said, her voice trembling with a fake fear that made my stomach turn. He was being aggressive with a passenger in 1A and ignored my instructions to relocate. "He's been disruptive since he boarded." "That's a lie," I said, but I knew it didn't matter. The truth was a luxury I didn't have right now. Officer Miller reached for a pair of heavy-duty zip ties on his belt. "Sir, you have 10 seconds to comply and move to the rear of the aircraft, or you will be removed in restraints and placed under arrest for federal interference. Do you understand?" I looked past him, down the aisle. I saw the man in 1A smirking. He knew he'd won. He'd used the system like a weapon, and the system had answered the call. And then I looked at Tom. He had put his headphones back on. He was done with me. He'd already written me off as a casualty of the trip. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye, but I blinked it away. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I thought about my father. I thought about him cleaning floors just like the one I was standing on, bowing his head so he wouldn't be seen as a threat. He did it, so I wouldn't have to. And yet, here I was, 50 years later, in a $5,000 seat, facing the same cold, hard wall he'd faced his whole life. "I have a phone call to make," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No calls." Miller snapped, stepping closer. He reached for my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like iron claws. "You're done talking. Buddy, move." He shoved me toward the door. I stumbled, my laptop bag sliding off my shoulder and hitting the floor with a heavy thud. The sound of the plastic casing cracking was loud in the silence of the cabin. That bag contained the merger documents. It contained the future of my company, and it was lying there on the floor, being kicked aside by an officer who didn't even know my name. As he pushed me toward the jet bridge, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't a victim. I was Marcus Sterling. I had built an empire from nothing, and I wasn't going to let it be dismantled by a flight attendant and a man who liked golf. "Wait," I said, digging my heels into the carpet. Miller gripped his taser. "Don't do it." "Sir, don't make this worse for yourself." I reached into my pocket. Slowly, carefully, I could feel the tension in the cabin reach a breaking point. Someone gasped. Janet shrieked. Miller's hand tightened on the taser. But I didn't pull out a weapon. I pulled out my phone. It was vibrating in my hand. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know who it was. The timing was too perfect. It was the universe giving me a lifeline. Or maybe just a chance to see how deep the rot really went. I looked Miller in the eye, my face a mask of iron. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there in the doorway of the plane, the wind from the jet bridge whipping my hoodie around my waist, and I felt the weight of the entire world pressing down on that one tiny green button on my screen. I knew that once I pressed it, everything was going to change. The merger, the friendship with Tom, the reputation I'd spent decades building. It was all going to burn, and for the first time in my life, I was okay with that. I was ready to let it all go just to see the look on their faces when the truth finally caught up to them. I stood my ground, my thumb hovering over the glass, as the Air Marshal's grip on my arm tightened to the point of pain. The vibration in my hand felt like a live wire, a rhythmic buzzing that pulsed against the very palm that Officer Miller was trying to twist behind my back. He had his knee jammed near my thigh, the scent of cheap polyester and stale coffee radiating off his uniform as he prepared to haul me out like a piece of refuse. Janet, the flight attendant, was standing there with her arms crossed, her eyes darting toward the passengers who were still filming, her mouth set in a thin line of manufactured triumph. She thought she had cleaned her cabin. She thought she had restored the order her world demanded. But then, I swiped the screen. I didn't even look at the caller ID. I knew the frequency. I hit the speakerphone icon and held the device up between me and Miller's face. Marcus. You there? Buddy. The voice that boomed through the quiet galley wasn't just loud. It was authoritative. It was the kind of voice that sounded like mahogany desks and private golf courses. It was Arthur Vance, the CEO of the very airline we were currently sitting on. The silence that hit that cabin was instantaneous. It was the kind of silence that follows a lightning strike, where the air itself feels charged and heavy. Miller's grip on my arm didn't just loosen, it went limp. He stepped back, his hand dropping away from my bicep as if my skin had suddenly turned into white-hot iron. I could see the confusion flickering in his eyes, the gears grinding as he tried to reconcile the aggressive passenger with the man being called Buddy by the guy whose name was on the tail of the plane. Arthur, I said, my voice coming out steady, cold, and sharper than a razor. I'm here, but I'm currently being escorted off your 6:00 p.m. flight out of JFK by an Air Marshal and a flight attendant named Janet. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Arthur's blood pressure rising. Excuse me? Escorted off. Marcus. We have a dinner meeting at the Peninsula in 3 hours to finalize the logistics contract. What the hell is going on? I looked at Janet. Her face hadn't just turned pale, it had turned a sickly shade of gray. Like old dishwater, her hand went to her throat, her fingers fumbling with the silk scarf of her uniform. She looked at Miller, but Miller was busy staring at the floor, his broad shoulders suddenly looking slumped and small. It seems there was a misunderstanding about my seat in 1A, I said, loud enough for the man in the golf shirt to hear me. Apparently, my presence was making some of the guests uncomfortable, and Janet here felt that my proper place was in the back of the aircraft, or in handcuffs. Take your pick. Put her on, Arthur barked. His voice was no longer friendly. It was the voice of a man who was about to dismantle someone's career. I held the phone out toward Janet. She didn't move at first. She looked like she wanted to melt into the galley floor. I saw her eyes dart toward Tom in 2. Tom had finally taken his headphones off. He was standing up now, his face a mask of shock and sudden, greasy realization. He realized the ship was sinking, and he realized he had spent the last hour throwing the only person who could save him overboard. Janet, I said, my voice dripping with a calm that was more terrifying than a scream. "The owner of your company would like a word." She took the phone with fingers that were visibly shaking. "Hello, this is Janet." I didn't need to hear Arthur's side of the conversation. I watched her face. I watched the way her eyes filled with tears, the way her posture collapsed, and the way she kept saying, "I didn't know." I thought, "Yes, sir, I understand, sir." She handed the phone back to me like it was a live grenade. The man in 1A, the one who had been so smug with his golf magazine, was now trying to shrink into his seat. He pulled his shoes back on, his movements frantic and clumsy. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a coward who had been caught in a lie. Then there was Tom. Tom stepped out into the aisle, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He had that fake, practiced smile on his face, the one he used when he was trying to smooth over a botched deal. Marcus. Mon. What a crazy mix-up. Right. I was just about to say something. I was just waiting for the right moment to intervene. "Arthur, you know how these things go." I turned my head and looked Tom dead in the eye. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing. It was the kind of emptiness you feel when you realize the house you've been living in is made of smoke and mirrors. "Stay back, Tom," I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a boundary. "Marcus, come on. Let's not be hasty," Tom stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "We've got the merger. We've got the board meeting. Don't let this little incident ruin 10 years of work. Let's just sit down, get a drink, and forget this ever happened." I looked at the phone in my hand. Arthur was still there. "Arthur, you still on?" "I'm here." "Marcus, tell me what you want to do." I looked at the cabin, the blue leather, the silent passengers with their glowing phones, the broken laptop bag on the floor. I thought about my father. I thought about the way he used to come home with his back aching, smelling of floor wax, but still holding his head high because he knew who he was. He told me that success wasn't about the money in the bank. It was about the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and not see a stranger. "Arthur, cancel the merger," I said. Tom's face went white. "Marcus, you can't be serious. That's $50 million for you. You're throwing it away over a seat." It was never about the seat. "Tom," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of 20 years of grinding. It was about the silence. You watch them treat me like a criminal. You watch them put hands on me. And you sat there and told me not to make us look bad. You didn't see a partner. You saw a liability that happened to be black. I turned back to the phone. "Arthur, I'm not taking this flight. And Skylogics is terminating its contract with your airline effective immediately. I'll send the paperwork from my office tomorrow." "Marcus." "Wait," Arthur started. But I ended the call. The silence returned. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the silence of intimidation. It was the silence of respect. Or maybe it was fear. I didn't care which. I reached down and picked up my cracked laptop bag. The plastic was jagged. The screen inside probably shattered, but it felt lighter than it had in years. I looked at Officer Miller. He was standing by the door, his head down. He wouldn't even look at me. "You can move now," I said. He stepped aside without a word. I turned to Janet. She was sobbing quietly into a napkin. I didn't feel sorry for her. I didn't feel vengeful either. I just felt finished. "Janet," I said, "next time someone tells you they belong here, try believing them. It'll save you a lot of trouble." I walked out of that plane. I walked back through the jet bridge, the air growing warmer and more real with every step. I didn't look back at Tom. I didn't look back at the Group 1 sign. I walked out into the terminal. past the gate agents who had flagged me, past the TSA officers who had searched me, and out into the New York night. I stood at the curb, waiting for a car. The city was a sea of yellow cabs and neon lights. A chaotic, beautiful mess of people all trying to get somewhere. I took a deep breath, the cold April air stinging my lungs in the best way possible. I felt a strange sense of peace. I had lost a $50 million merger. I had lost a 10-year partnership. I had a broken laptop and a bruised arm. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like Marcus Sterling again. I want to thank you for sticking with me through this story. It's not easy to talk about these things. It's not easy to admit that even at the top, the climb never really ends. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt that cold knot of being out of place, I want you to know that you are enough. Your soul is bright enough. Don't let them shrink you. Drop a comment below and tell me a time you had to stand up for yourself when the whole world wanted you to stay quiet. I read every single one of them. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep telling the truths that people try to hide in the dark. I'll see you in the next one. Keep your head up. Always. You ever hear that sound? That specific, sharp, mechanical click of heavy-duty zip ties or handcuffs snapping shut. It's a sound that doesn't just hit your ears, it hits your soul. It's a sound that tells you, in a fraction of a second, that all the degrees on your wall, all the zeros in your bank account, and all the respect you thought you'd earned in the boardroom don't mean a damn thing. I'm sitting here today, 50 years old, the CEO of a company that moves more freight in a day than most people see in a lifetime. And yet, I'm still haunted by the way a room goes cold when I walk in. Before I dive into the heart of what happened on that humid Monday at Hartsfield-Jackson, I want to check in with you. Where are you listening from? Are you in your car? At the gym? Or maybe just sitting at home trying to make sense of the world? Drop a comment and let me know. It helps me feel like I'm talking to a friend, not just a screen. And if you've ever had to mask who you are just to survive a day, hit that subscribe button. We're building a space here where the truth doesn't have to hide. It was one of those Atlanta mornings where the air feels like a wet blanket. I was exhausted. I'd spent the weekend closing a deal that was supposed to be the crown jewel of my career. And all I wanted was to get on that flight to LA, close my eyes, and disappear into the hum of the jet engines. I was wearing my travel uniform, a high-end, charcoal gray hoodie, some comfortable joggers, and a pair of sneakers that cost more than my first car. But I wasn't carrying a designer suitcase. I didn't have one of those shiny Rimowa bags that all the other tech guys carry. No, I was clutching an old, battered, cognac-colored leather briefcase. This briefcase, it was my father's. It was scratched. The brass latches were dull, and the handle was worn thin from decades of his grip. It smelled like old cedar, peppermint, and hard work. My father carried that bag to every job interview, every church meeting, and eventually to the small office where he ran his own modest landscaping business. To the world, it looked like a piece of junk. To me, it was the only thing I had left of him. It held his handwritten journals, the last remains of my late wife's jewelry I was taking to be appraised, and some sensitive merger documents. It was my heart in a leather box. I was standing in the priority lane at the gate, just trying to be invisible. You know that feeling. When you're a black man in a space that's designed for luxury, you learn how to make yourself small. You don't talk too loud on the phone. You don't make sudden movements. You keep your head down and your boarding pass visible. But even then, The gaze finds you. I felt it before I saw her. You know that prickle on the back of your neck when someone is staring at you, like you're a glitch in the software. I looked up, and there she was. Let's call her the Gatekeeper. She was a woman in a beige trench coat, pearls around her neck, and a look of permanent dissatisfaction on her face. She was standing a few feet away, her eyes darting from my sneakers to my face, and then, inevitably, to that battered briefcase. She didn't just look at it. She scrutinized it like it was a ticking time bomb. She whispered something to the man next to her, a guy in a sharp suit who looked like he'd never missed a meal in his life. He looked at me, then looked away quickly. But she didn't. She stayed locked on me. Every time I moved my hand to check my watch, she flinched. Every time I adjusted the strap on my bag, her hand hovered over her phone. She was performing a silent audit of my right to exist in that space, and I could feel the familiar tax being pulled from my spirit. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Marcus, you're a CEO. You've got a black card in your pocket. You belong here. But the truth is, man, that CEO armor is thin. It's made of paper. It doesn't stop the cold looks. It doesn't stop the way the gate agent's voice changes when it's my turn to board. Sir, I'll need to see your ID again, the agent said. Her voice was customer service polite, but her eyes were scanning the terminal behind me, looking for the officers I already knew were coming. I'd seen them at the end of the jet bridge. 2 white officers, arms crossed, nodding toward the group one line. My line. I just showed it to you at the check-in desk, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. Is there a problem? Just a routine check. Sir, we've had reports of suspicious baggage in the area. She lied. I knew it was a lie because I could see the Gatekeeper in the beige coat watching us. A small, smug smile playing on her lips. She had done it. I handed over the ID. My hands weren't shaking, but my heart was doing that heavy thud-thud against my ribs. It's the sound of a man who knows the rules are about to change. I looked at the officers. They started walking toward the gate. They weren't rushing. They didn't have to. They had all the time in the world because, in their eyes, I wasn't going anywhere. I looked down at the briefcase. The leather felt cool under my fingertips. I thought about my father, about how many times he had to stand in lines like this, bowing his head so his son wouldn't have to. I felt a surge of grief so sharp it almost took my breath away. I had worked so hard to get to the top, to be the one who made the rules. And yet here I was, being reduced to a description in a police report. The officers were 10 feet away now. The terminal, which had been a chaotic mess of voices and rolling suitcases, suddenly went quiet. You ever notice that? How the world goes silent when the law shows up for someone who looks like me? The Gatekeeper in the beige coat took a step back, making room for the officers. She looked at them with a nod of approval, the way you'd look at a waiter who finally brought your drink. She was the architect of this moment, and she was staying to watch the building fall. I stood my ground, my fingers gripping the worn handle of my father's bag so hard the leather began to groan. I didn't look at the officers. I didn't look at the agent. I kept my eyes fixed on the first-class sign above the door, a plastic piece of branding that felt like a joke. The air in the terminal seemed to thin out, leaving me gasping for a breath that wouldn't come, as the 2 men in blue uniforms stepped into my personal space, their shadows stretching across the polished floor until they touched the toes of my shoes. I could feel the heat radiating off them, the smell of starch and metal, and the heavy, undeniable weight of a world that was closing in on me. The air between me and those 2 officers didn't just feel thick, it felt electrified. Like the moment right before a transformer blows during a summer storm in Georgia. One of them, a man with a jaw like a cinder block and eyes that had long ago traded empathy for suspicion, didn't say a word at first. He just looked down at my father's briefcase. He looked at it like it was an alien object, something that didn't belong in the pristine, sterile environment of a priority boarding lane. I could feel the eyes of every passenger behind me boring into my back. It's a specific kind of heat. Man, the kind that makes the back of your neck itch because you know people aren't just watching, they're judging. They're forming a narrative where I'm the villain and they're the witnesses. Sir, we're going to need you to step out of the line for a moment, the older officer said. His voice was low, that practiced, authoritative rumble that's designed to make you feel like you've already been convicted. I looked at his badge. Officer Miller. I looked at his partner, a younger guy who looked like he'd just finished his first week on the force and was itching for something to happen. His hand was resting just a little too close to his belt, his fingers twitching. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep the CEO Marcus in the driver's seat. That Marcus knows how to negotiate. That Marcus knows that losing your cool is the fastest way to lose the room. But beneath that, the other Marcus, the one who grew up in a neighborhood where seeing those blue lights meant you didn't go home, was screaming. "I've already shown my ID to the gate agent," I said, my voice coming out like gravel. I held the handle of the briefcase tighter. Is there a specific reason I'm being asked to step aside while everyone else is boarding? Miller didn't answer the question. He just gestured toward the jet bridge wall. Step out of the line. Sir, now. I saw the gatekeeper, the woman in the beige trench coat, move past me. She didn't just walk, she glided. As she passed, she didn't look at me, but I caught the scent of her perfume, something expensive and floral that felt like a slap in the face. She handed her boarding pass to the agent, who smiled at her with a warmth that was never offered to me. It was a silent confirmation. She had lit the fuse, and now she was heading to her seat to watch the explosion from a safe distance. I stepped out of the line. The walk of shame is only 10 feet, but it feels like 10 miles. I stood against the cold metal of the jet bridge wall, clutching that bag. This bag. Man, it wasn't just leather and brass. I could feel the weight of what was inside pressing against my thigh. It held my grandfather's journals, pages and pages of ink from a man who survived the Jim Crow South. A man who wrote about the dignity of a clean shirt and a straight back even when the world tried to break him. It held the jewelry I'd taken from the safe deposit box after Maya passed. Her pearls. Her engagement ring. Things that were meant for a future we didn't get to have. To the officers, it was suspicious. To me, it was my entire history. What's in the bag, sir? The younger officer asked. His voice was higher, thinner. He was trying to sound tough, but he just sounded hungry for trouble. Personal items, I said. Heirlooms. Documents for a merger. A merger, Miller repeated, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked at my hoodie, then at my joggers. He didn't see the millions of dollars of equity I'd built. He saw a guy who looked like he'd jumped a fence. That's a fancy word for a guy carrying a bag that looks like it came out of a dumpster. The disrespect hit me like a physical blow. That bag had more integrity in one scratched corner than Miller had in his entire uniform. My father carried that bag when he went to the bank to ask for the loan that started his business. This bag belonged to my father, I said, and for the first time, my voice wasn't just steady, it was sharp. It was the voice I use when a board member tries to undermine my vision. And I'm the CEO of SkyLogics. If you're detaining me, I need to know the grounds, or I'm going to board my flight. The mention of the company name made Miller's eyes flicker for a second. But then the mask of authority hardened. We had a report of a man acting erratically with a suspicious, unvetted container. We're just doing our jobs. Mr. Sterling, you can board, but we're going to be keeping a close eye on the situation. He stepped back, but he didn't leave. He just gave me enough room to pass, like a predator letting a gazelle think it's escaped. I walked toward the plane, my heart hammering a rhythm that felt like it was trying to break through my ribs. The jet bridge felt like a tunnel that was shrinking around me. I could hear their footsteps behind me, heavy, rhythmic, echoing off the walls. I reached the door of the plane. The lead flight attendant, a woman with a smile so plastic it looked like it would melt under the cabin lights. Checked my pass. 1 billion. Mr. Sterling, welcome aboard, she said. But her eyes weren't on my face. They were on the 2 officers standing right behind me. Her smile faltered, her gaze shifting to the briefcase. I walked into the first-class cabin. Usually, this is where I breathe. The wide seats, the quiet, the smell of warm nuts and expensive bourbon. It's the reward for the grind. But as I sat down in 1B, the luxury felt like a trap. I was the only black man in the cabin, the only person in a hoodie. Every other passenger was already settled, looking at me with that mixture of curiosity and judgment that I'd felt at the gate. I saw the gatekeeper in 3A. She was already sipping a glass of champagne, her trench coat neatly folded in the overhead bin. She looked at me, then leaned over to whisper to the man next to her. I shoved the briefcase under the seat in front of me. I didn't want to put it in the overhead. I didn't want it out of my sight. I sat there, staring at the back of the seat, my hands trembling just enough that I had to lace my fingers together. I thought about the CEO armor again. I'd spent 20 years building a life that was supposed to protect me from this. I'd worked late nights, made the right moves, and dressed the part when I had to. I thought that once I reached a certain level, the rules would change for me. I thought the world would see the CEO before they saw the black man. But the truth is, Mon, the world doesn't care about your title when you're 30. 0 feet in the air and someone decides you don't belong. In this pressurized metal tube, we're all just descriptions. I felt the sweat starting to bead at my temples. The cabin was cool, but I was burning up. Every time a flight attendant walked by, I felt her gaze linger on me. The plane was still at the gate. The boarding process was finishing up. I watched the last few passengers trickle in from the back. I kept waiting for the door to close, for the thump that meant we were finally disconnected from the terminal. I just wanted to be in the air. I wanted to be in that no man's land where I could at least pretend I was safe. But then, the door didn't close. I heard the sound of voices at the front of the plane. Low, urgent whispering. I looked up and saw the flight attendant talking to the 2 officers who had followed me down the jet bridge. They were pointing toward my row, not just at the seat, but at the floor, at the back. My stomach dropped. I felt a coldness spread through my limbs. The flight attendant looked at me, her face pale, her plastic smile gone. She nodded to the officers, and they stepped into the cabin. They weren't walking toward the back. They were coming straight for 1B. Miller reached my row first. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his shadow falling over me, blocking out the light from the cabin. He looked down at the briefcase under the seat. Then he looked at me. His partner was right behind him, his hand back on his belt, his eyes scanning the cabin to make sure nobody was going to interfere. Mr. Sterling, Miller said, his voice loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. We've had a secondary report regarding the contents of that container. For the safety of the flight, we're going to need you to step off the aircraft immediately and bring the bag with you. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't a routine check anymore. This was a removal. This was the moment where the CEO died and the suspect took over. I looked at the bag. I thought about the ashes of my wife's memory. I thought about my grandfather's journals. I thought about my father's hands. I have a right to be on this flight, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I haven't done anything wrong. Miller leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath, the metallic scent of his badge. You can do this the easy way, or we can make this a scene that your stockholders aren't going to like. Get the bag, Marcus. Now. I reached down, my fingers brushing against the cold, worn leather of the briefcase. I felt a sudden, sharp surge of grief, not for the flight, not for the merger, but for the man I thought I had become. I realized that no matter how far I traveled, I was still standing in that same hallway my father stood in, waiting for a permission that was never going to come. I gripped the handle, the brass latches clicking with a sound that felt like a gavel hitting a bench, as I slowly began to pull the legacy of my family out from under the seat, the weight of it feeling like lead in my hands. I stood up, my knees feeling weak, as the entire cabin watched me, and I walked toward the open door. The carpet of the jet bridge felt like quicksand under my feet, every step pulling me deeper into a reality I'd spent 30 years trying to outrun. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had turned my head to see the smirks in first class, or the way the gatekeeper was probably adjusting her pearls in triumph, I think I would have shattered right there in front of everyone. I could hear the heavy, rhythmic thud of Miller's boots behind me, a sound that echoed off the corrugated metal walls of the tunnel, making it feel like I was being marched toward a gallows rather than a security desk. The humidity of the Atlanta morning rushed back to meet me at the door, thick and suffocating, smelling of asphalt and rain. We stopped halfway down the bridge, away from the prying eyes of the passengers, but still close enough to hear the thump of the aircraft door finally closing. That sound, that heavy, final seal, felt like a door closing on my life. My seat was on that plane. My future was on that plane. Put the bag on the floor. Miller barked. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, clutching the handle so hard my knuckles were white, the leather biting into my palm. This bag. It was the only thing that felt real. Inside were the journals of a man who had survived things Miller couldn't even imagine. Inside was the jewelry of a woman who had loved me when I was a nobody in a basement. It was my sanctuary, and they wanted to strip it bare on a dirty floor. I said, "Put it down." "Marcus," Miller repeated, his hand hovering near the zip ties on his belt. The younger officer was hovering to the side, his eyes darting around, looking nervous. He knew this wasn't right, but he was too afraid to be the one to stop it. I slowly knelt. It was a physical surrender that felt like a knife in my gut. I placed the cognac-colored briefcase on the stained carpet. The brass latches caught the dim light of the bridge, glowing like dying embers. "Open it," Miller commanded. "There is nothing in here but my family's history," I said, my voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "I am a CEO. I have a merger to close. You are making a mistake that you can't walk back." "Yeah, we've heard the CEO story before," the younger officer muttered, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just open the container." We had a report of a handoff and suspicious documents. "Let's see what you're hiding." I clicked the latches. Snap. Snap. The sounds were loud, like gunshots in the small space. I peeled back the leather lid, and the scent of cedar and aged paper filled the air. Miller leaned in. his face twisted in a sneer, ready to find the drugs, the cash, the contraband that his bias had promised him. But as he reached in with his gloved hands, he froze. He didn't pull out a stack of hundreds. He didn't pull out a bag of white powder. He pulled out a small, tattered notebook with a cracked spine, my grandfather's journal. He flipped it open, his rough fingers brushing against the delicate, elegant cursive of a man who had taught himself to read by candlelight. June 14th, 1952. They told me today I couldn't drink from the fountain in the square. I smiled and kept walking because my dignity is well, they can't poison. Miller stared at the page. The sneer didn't disappear, but it wavered. He dug deeper, his hands rummaging through the velvet pouches. He pulled out Maya's engagement ring. The diamond caught the light, sparkling with a brilliance that made the jet bridge look even grittier. He pulled out her pearls, the ones she wore on the night I finally told her we were going to be okay. He dumped the contents of the bag onto the floor, my father's journals, the jewelry, the merger documents. All of it lay scattered on the dirty carpet like trash. "Is this it?" Miller asked, his voice losing some of its edge, replaced by a defensive kind of anger. "Where's the rest of it? We had a report of a high-value exchange." I looked at my life lying on the floor. I looked at my late wife's pearls touching a grease stain on the carpet. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was the kind of break that happens when a bridge finally gives way after 100 years of storms. The fear didn't leave me, but it transformed. It turned into a cold, hard, crystalline power. I didn't stay on my knees. I stood up. I didn't ask for permission. I stood to my full height, pulling my shoulders back, the Hazy EO armor finally settling onto my bones, not as a disguise, but as a weapon. "You're looking for a crime," I said, and my voice was so calm it made the younger officer take a step back. "But the only crime here is yours. You took a tip from a woman who didn't like the color of my skin, and you used your badges to satisfy her spite. You didn't do your jobs. You did her dirty work. Watch your tone, Sterling," Miller said, but he sounded unsure now. He was looking at the merger documents, the ones with the gold-embossed seal of a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. He was seeing names on those papers that he recognized, names of men who played golf with his boss. "No, Miller, you watch mine," I said. I reached into my hoodie pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't call the police. I dialed a direct number, a number that only a handful of people in the country have. "Arthur," I said, when the line picked up. "It's Marcus Sterling. I'm currently on the jet bridge of your 15 a.m. flight to LA. I've been removed from the plane. Your security team is currently throwing my wife's ashes and my company's merger documents on the floor because a passenger didn't like my bag." I put the phone on speaker. The voice that came through was booming, clear, and filled with a cold, corporate fury that made Miller's face go gray. It was the CEO of the airline. "Miller," the voice barked. "Is that you? Tell me. I'm not hearing what I think I'm hearing." The younger officer looked like he wanted to bolt. Miller stood there, his hand still holding Maya's pearls, his mouth hanging open. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had inverted. I wasn't a description anymore. I was the man who provided the logistics software that kept their entire airline from collapsing. I reached down and began to pick up my things. I didn't rush. I took my time. I wiped the grease off Maya's pearls with the sleeve of my hoodie. I gathered my grandfather's journals and placed them back into the briefcase, one by one, like I was tucking them into bed. My hands were steady now. The numbness was gone. replaced by a searing, focused clarity. I stood up and looked Miller in the eye. He looked small. He looked like a man who had spent his life bullying people who couldn't fight back, and he had finally run into a wall he couldn't climb. "The woman in 3A, I said, my voice a whisper that carried the weight of a mountain. "The one in the beige coat. I want her removed. Now, if she is on that plane when I walk back on, I will pull my contract with this airline before we hit cruising altitude." Miller didn't argue. He didn't bluster. He just nodded, his face a mask of humiliation. He turned to his partner, his movements jerky and panicked. "Go. Get her off. Now." I stood on the jet bridge, the humid air swirling around me, but I didn't feel suffocated anymore. I felt like I was finally breathing for the first time in my life. I watched the younger officer run toward the plane, his boots clicking on the metal. I stood there with my father's bag, the leather warm against my leg, feeling the ghosts of my ancestors standing right behind me, their hands on my shoulders, their voices whispering that the time for bowing our heads was over. I wasn't just Marcus the CEO anymore. I was Marcus the man, and I was about to walk back through that door with a fire in my eyes that no badge could ever put out. The silence on that jet bridge wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind anymore. It was the hollow, ringing silence that follows a massive explosion. Miller stood there, his face the color of wet ash, holding my late wife's pearls like they were a handful of burning coals. He looked at the phone in my hand as if it were a detonator. I could still hear Arthur's voice vibrating through the speaker. Low, dangerous, and dripping with the kind of corporate power that makes men in uniforms lose sleep. I didn't say a word. I just watched Miller. I watched the way his chest hitched, the way his eyes darted to the scattered journals on the floor, and the way he finally realized that he had kicked the wrong door down. Then, I heard it, the sound of high heels clicking rapidly on the metal floor of the jet bridge. Coming from the direction of the plane, it was a frantic, uneven rhythm. So. The younger officer reappeared, and he wasn't alone. He was leading the woman in the beige trench coat, the Gatekeeper. She was protesting, her voice high and shrill, echoing off the corrugated walls. "This is an outrage. Do you have any idea who my husband is? I am a gold member. Why am I being removed? I'm the one who reported the—" She stopped dead when she saw me. She stopped Keith, the Air Marshal, standing there with his head bowed, looking like a scolded child. She stopped Keith, the contents of my life spilled out on the dirty carpet. Her eyes went from the pearls to the journals, then to my face. For the first time, I didn't see suspicion in her gaze. I saw a flash of raw, ugly realization. She saw the description she had created, and for the first time, she saw the man behind it. "Miller," she stammered, looking at the officer for support. "What is going on? Why is he still here? Why are you holding those?" Miller didn't even look at her. He just handed the pearls back to me, his hand shaking so much the delicate string rattled. "Sir," he whispered, I truly am sorry. The safety of who?" "Miller," I interrupted. I took the pearls from him, feeling the cool, smooth surface against my palm. I carefully placed them back into the velvet pouch. "Whose safety were you worried about?" "Because I've been sitting in that cabin for 20 minutes. And the only threat I felt was from the people wearing badges." Arthur's voice came through the phone again, sharp as a blade. "Marcus, is she there? Is the passenger who made the report there?" I looked at the woman. She was trying to pull her arm away from the younger officer, her face twisting back into a mask of indignation. "I am right here," she yelled toward the phone. "And I want to know why I'm being treated like a criminal when I was just trying to keep this flight safe from—" Safe from what? Ma'am. Arthur's voice was like ice. From a man who owns more of this airline stock than you've likely ever seen. My name is Arthur Vance, CEO of this airline, and I suggest you stop talking right now. The woman went silent. It wasn't the silence of understanding. It was the silence of fear. She looked at me, her mouth hanging open, the pearls around her own neck looking suddenly garish and cheap. She didn't have a comeback. She didn't have a manager to call. She had run into the one thing her world couldn't bypass. A man with more power than her. Miller, I said, my voice low and steady. Get her off the bridge. I don't want to see her face again. The younger officer didn't hesitate. He turned her around and started leading her back toward the terminal. She didn't fight him this time. She just walked. Her shoulders slumped, her expensive coat trailing on the ground. She was gone, but the stain she left in the air stayed. Miller stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something else, a plea for his job, maybe, or a more sincere apology. I didn't give him the chance. I just started packing the rest of my father's journals back into the cognac briefcase. I did it slowly. With a reverence that felt like a prayer, I smoothed out the pages of my grandfather's journal. I tucked the merger documents into the side pocket. I clicked the brass latches shut, snap, snap, and the sound was the only closure I needed from him. Marcus, Arthur said on the line, his tone softening. The flight is yours. The lead attendant has been informed. I'm having them hold the departure. I'll meet you in L.A. We'll handle the rest of this with the Port Authority Key Bond land. I'm so sorry, brother. This never should have happened. I looked at the plane. I could be the flight attendant. Janet, standing at the door. She was watching us, her face a mask of pale terror. She was ready to offer me the world now. Free champagne. 1,000 apologies. She was ready to treat me like a king because she found out I was a CEO. Nonki, I looked at that open door. I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of exhaustion. Arthur, I said into the phone, I'm not taking the flight. There was a pause. What? Marcus, you have the merger. You have the meeting. No, I said. I looked out through the windows of the jet bridge at the tarmac. I can't sit in that seat right now. Every time I look at it, I'm going to see the smirks. The spirit of the trip is dead. Arthur, I'm going home. I understand. Arthur Noy. And for the first time, he sounded like a friend. I'll have a car waiting for you at the curb. We'll talk tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I didn't look at Miller as I walked past him. I walked back through the jet bridge, back through the gate where the agents were now standing at attention. I walked through the terminal, my father's bag in my hand, my head held high. I walked out of the airport and stood on the curb, the humid Atlanta air wrapping around me like an old friend. I watched a plane take off, its engines roaring as it lifted into the gray morning sky. I knew my seat was empty on that plane. I knew the merger might be delayed, but as I stood there, I felt a strange, quiet sense of victory. My success hadn't saved me from the dirt of that jet bridge floor. Hung No had given me the shovel to dig my way out. No had given me the power to say no to a world that was trying to tell me I didn't belong. I looked down at the briefcase. It had survived my father's life, and it was going to survive mine. I thought about the hidden taxes we pay, the energy it takes to navigate a world that sees your skin before it sees your soul. I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that the fight doesn't end. Kibon get the title. Nhung Kai power, the real power, isn't in the bank account. It's in the soul. It's in the ability to walk away from a table that doesn't respect you. I want to hear from Benoit. Have you ever had to pay that hidden tax? Drop a comment below. Keep your head up. Keep your soul bright. I'll they ban in the next one. Always.